Tonight we begin the Sacred Triduum, and indeed Passover, as we have said on Palm Sunday. We're going to be reliving the feasts as Christ did. And it's good to kind of get in a perspective. Again, Passover began on a Thursday. And it began with the Passover meal. And we read about the Passover in our first reading. This is what you are to do. You are to, égorger is the French word, you are to slit the throat of the lamb so that the blood would pour out. And you would take that blood and you would apply it to the lintels of your house. This first Passover. When Christ would have celebrated the Passover with his disciples, there must have been, in fact, it's very interesting, the archaeology there, they found lots of basins and basically metal, I don't know what you'd call them, but basins that would carry the blood of the lambs, and hundreds of animals would be slaughtered. Hundreds, thousands. They'd be doing this for quite some time. The blood and the stench in the courts would be just unbelievable by the end, but they would be pouring all this blood into these basins so that people could take them home and do this. That would have happened when Jesus was there. So you get that flavor of this Passover taking place. This is the scene at which Jesus is placed in Jerusalem this Holy Thursday night. The animals are being slaughtered, and the flesh is being roasted. Again, this is the Passover meal that they would be eating, just as all the Jews in the city would be doing. And this is what Jesus did. He'd eat them, the roasted flesh, you would then eat with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. And you would be eating this meal, again, in a ritual way that had been done for generations of Jews. And particularly when the temple was gone, it was very difficult, but it had been restored. And therefore, it could continue. The blood of the lamb was the life of the animal, which would bring protection, would bring blessing. Whenever the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies, he would have to do so with blood of an animal, because you had to sacrifice the life of the animal for the life of the nation, literally. Each one would be, again, there was, as it were, a quid pro quo. I'm going to give you this blood because of my blood to live. I'm going to give you and offer you this life, the life of an animal, instead of the offering of a human. For example, in ancient cultures, for example, in Mexico City, you could go to the pyramids outside of Mexico City and you could see all the skulls. I was amazed by it because the people there, they would have their hearts cut out and placed on the altar to the Aztec god. The blood poured out, a very life given, so that, again, the ancients thought this would bring life to the country. And so, again, it's that blood offering of life. And it's in this setting that Jesus has this Last Supper. This Last Supper. He takes his disciples. He has been wanting and desirous to share this meal. And interesting enough, in the Gospel of St. John, we do not get the narrative of the supper itself. We get those from the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. St. John does not give us that narrative. We even read St. Paul's narrative in the book of Corinthians tonight, which was probably the earliest written before even the Gospels. The account of this first Eucharist was written by Paul first, actually. Very early. This was the first account of what happened at the Last Supper. He took bread and he broke it and he gave it to to his disciples. He blessed the wine and gave it to the disciples. Do this in memory of me. For when we eat this bread and drink this cup, we proclaim his death, St. Paul said tonight. And so we enter into this mystery that Jesus left us. He left us this memorial of his death and resurrection, which was the perpetual sacrifice of the Exodus. This same perpetual offering of the Lamb was transformed now to the Lamb of God. And not the blood of an animal, but the blood of Christ offered once. Because indeed, Jesus with his blood has entered a sanctuary not made by human hands, but to heaven. To heaven. His blood paid the price of humanity's sin. And that is all of humanity over all time. And this wonderful gift that he has given us in the Eucharist, again, is the perpetual sacrifice which we live by. The Church is of the Eucharist. Ecclesia de Eucharistia, John Paul wrote. It lives and breathes and has its functionality in the Eucharist itself. We wouldn't be church without the Eucharist. And indeed, that's how we live. But not only does he give us this gift of the Eucharist and of Mass, and you can imagine Jesus didn't have to do this. He didn't have to ordain priests tonight. He didn't have to. There was no need necessarily. You had in the Old Testament, the priests came from the descendants of Aaron. All the descendants of Aaron were the bloodline priests. You always had priests because you always had someone from Aaron's tribe. The lineage, it was one of heredity. But Jesus is a priest of the order of Melchizedek. In other words, chosen by God alone. And so his priesthood is an eternal priesthood that is not made up of something human, but it has a divine origin. And he didn't leave it as a one-time sacrifice. He left the gift of the priesthood to administer this for God's people, that one would serve as we have read tonight. Jesus does the act of the slave. To wash feet is the work of a slave. It's not the work of the master of the house. You don't wash your own feet. The slave washes your feet for you when you come in. And so when Jesus took out his outer garment, put on the towel, and began to wash the disciples' feet, Peter is the one who has verbalizes probably what they're all thinking. No, don't wash my feet. You're the master. I'm supposed to wash your feet. You see the indignation in Peter tonight. But Jesus says, allow me to do this. You don't need an entire bath. You just need your feet washed. You have been cleansed by my word. His word brought him faith, and this brought him salvation. Because it is by faith that Peter would live out his life, and it was by faith that he professed that Christ was the Son of God. You are the Christ. Indeed, this faith made him clean, but not all clean. And indeed, when you look at even the rite of when Aaron and his sons were made priests, part of The rite is bathing, believe it or not. They must be washed with water. You'll read that in the book of Numbers. If you're not have water, then that's part of the rite. They got to clean you up first. And then you put on the white tunic. We call it an alb. And then you put on an outer vestment. We call it a chasuble. So indeed, we live that out, that Old Testament, in a very exercise of our ministry, we wear the clothing that is prescribed in the Bible. Where does it come from? The Old Testament. We still do that. And wonderfully, this service, indeed, that Jesus does to disciples, the priesthood would be a new service. And in fact, the title of the Holy Father, and one of the earliest ones that was coming about, he was servant of the servants of God. That is his title. I am the servant of the servants of God. That is the Holy Father's job, to serve us. And indeed to unite himself to Christ for our sake. And that's what's special about today for priests. I always say that there's only one day of the year that we can actually talk about priesthood without just talking about vocation. And that's today. Because Christ instituted the priesthood for two reasons, I think. First, he wanted to draw men closer to himself in their relationship with him in faith. As the disciples walked in faith and grew in their faith, they had this unique union. And indeed, the disciple, we'll read it tomorrow, the disciple whom Jesus loved had special place. John called himself as the priestly disciple, the one that was most priestly. You always see John pictured as eagle with a chalice. Why? He was also very close to the Virgin. It was very beautiful, this model of priesthood. That indeed the priest unites himself to Christ in a very unique way. He forgoes a family to unite himself more fully to Christ, to live in the pattern of Jesus Christ and of the disciples. St. Paul even gives that advice in the book of Corinthians. No, you should be totally devoted to God and service of God. But it has to flow from one's relationship with Jesus. You don't have this firm foundation and firm attachment to Christ in faith, then you're called to serve. And it's always good to remind myself, because in Holy Week particular, you're real busy. Lots to do to make sure that, again, the celebrations are beautiful and are well done. It does take work, believe it or not, and lots of folks. But to remind ourselves tonight of these wonderful gifts, and indeed as we celebrate, as we continue to offer Mass, which is the Passover, we can put ourselves in this passage and in this Holy Triduum. We can put it in context, because tonight it is after this sacred meal that they go to the Garden of Gethsemane, and we're going to do that tonight. Our procession after Mass is just like the disciples going to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. And we will have an altar of repose in the Zurich Hall tonight. And just FYI, if you don't want to go in because it's not very big, we are opening the windows and doing the lights on it so you can stand outside and adore Jesus, like we did last year. If you remember last year, it was drive-by last year because we had COVID. We had to do a drive-by. But we're doing that again this year. We thought that was good for folks that didn't want to necessarily go in because it's a rather smaller space, but it's also very good for those of you who would like to just gather outside and pray. Because indeed, that's what we do. Can you wait 1 hour and pray with me? That's what happened. Jesus was in the garden and praying, and that's what we as a church do tonight. We relive Christ doing that with his disciples. And then tomorrow at 3 o'clock, which is the hour Jesus died, we will recall all the events that happened when we read the Passion of St. John tomorrow. We will recall all of those events until his putting in the tomb. That's tomorrow's liturgy. Remember, there's only one day a year where I can tell you there is no Mass. Good Friday, there are no Masses. And we will wait. And in the evening, if you want to come, we're going to reenact when Christ descended to the realm of the dead or to hell, and he raided, as it were, the tombs of the dead, the realm of the dead, right? If you want to come and do that, we'll have the harrowing of hell. I think the kids like that part a lot. We can stamp our feet, right, kids, as you've come? I get to stamp my feet in church and make lots of noise. So that's what we do. But it's to live that. And then Saturday we will obviously go to the resurrection. But it's important that we do and recall all of these events that Jesus does for us, because indeed it's good to know how far Jesus went, again, to save us, to not leave us orphaned, starving. No, Christ left us the gift of the Eucharist and the priest to make sure that we're not starving, that there is someone who can be and tries to live in a deeper relationship with Jesus Christ and tries to, again, live solely from this love of Christ and to be that witness of Christ's love. Because indeed, Christ gives us the fullness of grace and gives us this through the sacraments. And indeed, without the priest, we wouldn't have the sacraments. So let us have a heart of thanksgiving tonight, because Christ has left us a great memorial of his passion. He has given us his very body and blood as food for us, and he has given us the priesthood which we all have to depend on. God bless you.